never particularly
Well, it was
great.
NHL Network for me.
Yeah, well, it's all the same. It's all the same production company.
Hmm.
It all comes from the NHL essentially, and it's just it's always been overly cool. And if you're gonna have the shaded TOER and you're gonna use it that way with a lot of white, and the white balance is gonna get jacked like that, they're gonna look blue. It's gonna look like blue and white stripes. Um, but hey,
No, I
I
mean I
don't care.
figured it was something to do with, at least in part, a lack of color correction. But Jesus Christ, or bad color
Yeah,
correction.
you know what was real funny was I was arguing, not really arguing, but I was talking with someone a while ago about they were like, oh, they should. I hate what the Sharks are doing. They should go to something more original, like their originals. And I'm like, their originals was literally a lift of the Blackhawks template, and like half the teams in the NHL at that time. The color was original. Thumbs up to that. But like, that's not. If you're gonna do that, I think you have to point to their second uniform, which was the one with the shoulders and all that kind of stuff that kind of came down during the Damphousse Nolan era, because everything else, like every single one of their other ones, has been a template off of something else. Like none of those have been particularly original, which doesn't bother me. But it was such a weird argument to make. I don't know.
I mean, I think I like, actually, funnily enough, because of the way things were, where I previously liked the whites better than the teals. I actually liked the teals quite a lot in this context of
Oh, the teals
yesterday's
look
game.
great. Yeah. Again, when you see them live, they're like really sharp. Like they look great. I'm not wild about the black numbers on the whites, but it's not the end of the world. Don't really care at the end of the day. I mean, I do, but I don't. Everything looks nice and clean. Okay, number 187. You guys ready?
Oh my god, I just
Yes.
realized it's 187.
On a
On a
Let,
motherfucking cup.
let me start the actual recording. I've got the stream going, but not the recording.
Sure.
Yeah, glad we didn't catch that.
Make sure no one's breathing into the mic heavily, weirdos. I do like that Ben noted it wasn't me.
Well,
And the only reason he knew that
it's
was
because
because
you
I was also
talk so
talking.
fucking much. That's why.
Yep.
We're
Hey,
we're
man.
good.
All right. Hold on, let me get some water.
Gotta lubricate those lungs of holding.
Oof. Hello and welcome to Circling the Cup, San Jose Sharks podcast, episode number 187. It is the start of the NHL season, and we are going to talk about the Sharks' last preseason game on international ice, which is a very different game if you didn't notice, and also their first two games overseas against the Nashville Predators. The 2022-2023 season has officially begun here, especially with the San Jose Sharks. So you probably recognize my voice. I'm Alex. Here with me, as always, the Honorable Ben. What's up, Ben? Ben?
Ben died.
Oh, sorry about that. I was making sure I wasn't breathing into the mic this week.
Oh, that was good. You threw the entire podcast off. I like how you just did that. And of course, live via carrier pigeon from Sweden, we have Colin. What's up, Colin?
I love these uniforms.
They're great. Well, let's talk about the start of the Sharks season. They had 3 games since we last did the podcast. They had a game in, I believe, Berlin against a German team, and it was on international ice, which was a real interesting way to do a final tune-up for your regular season, given that play on international ice really isn't the same, just given the massive size of the rink and how much space that allows for. And then they flew over to Czech, to Prague, home of our good friend Tomáš Hurdle and Šimek, I believe, as well. And they played 2 games against the Nashville Predators, one home, or actually one away, and then one home. Not the strongest start for the San Jose Sharks this season. They wind up losing both of those games. We're going to talk about it a little bit. But I think one thing I want to throw out there for people who are immediately overreacting, you're talking about a team with a new coaching staff and a new system. And while you hope that they prepare really well through training camp and preseason, when you also take into account the number of new players that have come in, it's pretty reasonable to expect a bit of a sort of learning period where everything is sort of getting on the same page and going. And usually, the beginning of the season is not the best hockey that you're going to see. Not absolving the Sharks for some of their play by any means, but I did notice a lot of fans immediately fly off the deep end and go into the tank for Bedard, which, again, it's a lottery system. Tanking does not necessarily get you what you want, but beyond that, not sure what you were expecting out of these first two games, but if you thought that they were going to come out the gate and be a Stanley Cup contender, wow, your expectations may have been way off. And even I think if you thought that they were going to come out and immediately have everyone gelling and being on the same page and really nailing the system, also probably not the most realistic of expectations. But no excuses. Sharks didn't win. One thing that I think we need to point out, Ben, you had something to say about the aesthetics of the San Jose Sharks, correct?
Well, so I mean, I guess I my main issue, and we talked about this prior to the podcast starting, is that when the first game started and they were in their whites, I was briefly super confused why the Maple Leafs were on the ice against Nashville.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just me. I thought it was maybe my TV, but I actually did post to Twitter, "Hey, am I the only one that is having this issue?" And no, it turns out it wasn't just me or my TV. And yeah, the way the whites ended up looking sort of blown out and bluish actually had me liking the teals a lot better in the next game.
Yeah, there was a bit of a lot of the NHL games that get broadcast, you'll notice a pretty inconsistent white balancing across from the cameras, and that's essentially using the whites to sort of determine to basically center the color palette. And first of all, when you're talking about big white ice, big white sweaters, and then thin sort of tealish, darkish teal lines, you're going to get that. But also, I think Ben, it's fair because the stripe pattern is also really reminiscent as well as some of the past Maple Leafs sweaters. So yeah, I kind of had the same take at first. I was like, oh, this looks fairly Maple Leafy. But then when you saw them in their home garb, sharp. Like I've been saying, if once you see it in person, which I've had the good fortune of doing, those look great. And I think everyone who was up in arms about it being too teal or the pads or pajamas, when you're watching it from the right angles and you're watching it live, it doesn't have that feel at all. I think some of the pictures, maybe especially some of the early leaks, were a little bit misleading. But hey, we may look good on the ice, but we didn't really look good on the ice. If you know what I'm saying.
Well, it helps if you don't just intentionally ice an expansion level defensive core.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was the really frustrating thing for me about these first two games. And again, I didn't have very high expectations. One, I don't have super high expectations of this roster or this team at the moment. But two, I also typically have lower expectations for the first couple of games because they are sloppier. And again, with the amount of things that have changed in this offseason, I would expect there to be a little bit of a grace period. But the troubling thing to me was, some of the players that we picked up, who I wasn't expecting much from, and I didn't necessarily get much from. I didn't mind as much. Guys like Kunin, right? You know what I mean? Where he to me was in the right spot, playing right in front of the net. Great, love it. But the thing that consistently let me down was the defense, and this has been a Sharks problem for a long time now. And it's not like they necessarily picked up anyone that gave me the confidence that it would suddenly be fixed. But
quite the opposite, actually.
I know, yeah, not encouraging. I mean, look, obviously losing Burns meant that we were going to lose some scoring. Clearly, that was something we all accepted because it was worth sort of getting the cap clearance to be able to move forward and do other things. But the other pickups on this team, that defensive core, those first two games were almost non-existent to me. But I know, Ben, Colin, go ahead. Yeah, you've got thoughts.
Well, one of the things we were hoping to see less of with Burns gone was the number of defensemen face down on the ice when we get scored on. And that just, somehow that number's gone up.
I mean, yeah, to Colin's point. So I've got a running tracker that I'm doing this year of, so the team brought in these never-were's, not very good old players. So Benning, I don't know about Nudavari yet. He's hurt, so he hasn't played with us. What's the guy? I want to say Harrison, but I don't think that's right. He played the first game. But
Harrington?
Harrington, thank you. Harrington,
yeah.
etc. And those guys are bad. And the argument for playing these guys is, oh, they're veterans, they know what to do. That's the difference between them and a Ryan Merkley. But I've been keeping a running tracker of the terrible choices they made that led to goals that Merkley would have been absolutely murdered for, including the one where Colin's talking about, where I don't remember who was Benning's partner in that play, but the first Starfish was fine because it blocked the passing lane for enough time that Benning could get into position to use his stick to do something useful if the pass came across the crease. But then Benning decided, ooh, I like to slide too, and that led directly to the goal. So too long didn't read version. Benning sucks, and we got him for 4 years, so sweet.
What is it with the communication on defense on this team? Because I specifically have railed against that the last couple of seasons, where it just I think that was a really good example there, Ben. It just seems like the defense the last few years have just not been communicating or on the same page at all. Because to your point, having two people say, no, some of that's decision making, obviously.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think there with Benning, I don't know that it was a communication problem. He made a terrible fucking decision. He also made a terrible fucking decision to backhand a puck out of play, given no need to do that in the prior game, right? So he took a really, really stupid penalty. And again, something that if Ryan Merkley had done it, Hetty would have had a 30-minute diatribe about it, that he would have returned to 14 times a game. So I guess I really want to point this out because it shows the hypocrisy of the whole, we can't play a guy like Merkley because he's going to make mistakes. So we're going to play these, solid veteran defenders. And these are guys they picked up that make just as many, if not as many mistakes or more mistakes than a rookie does.
Yeah.
But they're going to get cover from the broadcast team, and they're going to get cover from the coaching staffs because of their age. I think frustrating.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not disagreeing with you here. I don't necessarily think it's just mistakes with Merkley. I think that in general they have issues with the high risk nature of his game. So again, he is a high risk, high reward potential guy.
But my point is that the mistakes that these other guys make is just as high risk. I'm not
arguing with you. I just want to point out the distinction of it's not just that he makes mistakes. It is the style of mistake that he makes that they're scared of. And I'm not saying that's right. After watching the defense this game, here's my major issue. And again, this is a small sample size. It's just not an encouraging one. But the San Jose Sharks this season, to kind of buy out time basically for contracts to expire, because let's be real, that's kind of what they're doing, because they can't do a whole hell of a lot until they get some of those off the books and can really bring some other players. Other than, yes, bring the youth up, which I know you're going to make that argument. I'm not disagreeing with you there. I'm just saying this is very much a transition year, I think, for them, and it's a buying time year. But if their mindset with building this roster was, we are going to slow down the play and be harder to play against, and we know we're losing scoring by moving out Burns. We know we haven't been getting secondary scoring. Then the idea that to fix the scoring, you would bring in guys who cannot score, but maybe you're saying, but we're going to play a more defensive game, and therefore we don't necessarily, like old Devils, right? Where you didn't necessarily have to score a ton of goals because you could slow down play enough, strangle it, take away space, whatever. But the problem is this defense is absolutely incapable of doing that. So now what you have is you have a team that is not going to be able to get much in the way of secondary scoring, which means your defense in the back half of the ice, which needs to be rock solid for that to play out in any positive way whatsoever, isn't going to happen. So you're not going to be able to score, and you're not going to be slowing down, taking away lanes, slowing down play, and stopping scoring the other direction. Basically means guys like Reimer and Kakkonen are going to be proper fucked for the season. And that's what I think is really frustrating. And I think, Ben, I look at Merkley and I say, look, he wasn't doing, he is high risk. I'm not against Merkley being on the NHL roster. And especially after seeing these first two games, I don't need to see any more games for me to immediately make the call of, well, you know what? At least I'm going to get the same level of, mistake, but I'm going to get some secondary scoring out of it.
And a higher ceiling.
Yeah, I agree.
This
was a really bad performance.
The biggest issue with the decisions that have been made by this team is that, this goes to Cunnin as well. which by the way is the way Han was pronouncing it. So I'm gonna.
Oh yeah, did I
go
say
with that.
Kunin? I keep
I
screwing
know.
that up.
I had
Kunin,
been saying that throughout. Anyway, Cunnin. I'm trying to correct myself, not you. Cunnin's fine. I like what I've seen from Cunnin. My problem isn't Cunnin. I think he's a perfectly serviceable third line forward who they've put, on the power play, etc. My problem again is that, Cunnin probably is in the organization right now one of the top 12 forwards we've got. That's great, but Reedy would give us exactly the same performance, if not better, potentially with more upside, right? Like, Reedy's ready for NHL play. He showed that last year. He's a net front guy too. He should be up, right? That's my problem. There's other guys that should be off the ice than Cunnin. Cunnin's fine. Like, great.
Yeah.
Like, Nieto, there's no reason Nieto should be on the ice.
Yep.
Like,
actually, I saw why Nieto's on the ice, because he knows how to hold sticks and draw penalties from refs who give him sympathy calls.
I mean, here's the thing. Here's the other thing too, Ben, and I completely agree with you. But the other thing with Cunnin is that's fine for one of those guys, but we don't need like 7 of them. You know what I mean? Like this, like this roster is composed almost entirely. Like, look, Barabanov was out. I understand, but like we have a lot of basically equivalent fourth line forwards. Yeah. And you don't need 50 of those. No. You could argue whether or not you even need one of them, which is fair. Yeah. Again, you could. It was very frustrating for me to see the team bring Eklund and Bordelot and not really give them the time of day. There is a bit of a fan thing going on, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but I understand it, and it's not the worst logic in the world, which is, and I think it's a little bit more of a conspiracy theory than anything, but the reason why Gooch and some of those guys went back was because they want to raise those guys together in the AHL and then pop them up at the same time. Now that's not really how that's going to play out, but I would much rather those guys be getting ice time than sitting and being a healthy scratch for however many games. And I really hope, like, it was very clear to me after the first game. And again, season starting, you had back-to-back games overseas, new coaching staff, new systems, some new players that you need to integrate in. Like, it's not going to be perfect. I wasn't really expecting them to throw those guys in, especially after they sort of, sat them prior. But it's just very clear that like this team needs that secondary scoring and that spark.
And not just hold on, because it gets worse, right? It's not just not playing those two guys who got scapegoated for the third line sucking. Noah Gregor.
Yeah, right.
Right, you're one young guy on that line who, by the way, actually can score goals. Unlike either, Benino can score goals, but he can't, pass the puck to save his life for assists, as we saw last year. But Nieto is still on the ice. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I don't understand what Nieto brings at all.
I'm telling you, he's one of those, like, he gets pity penalties. He holds sticks blatantly. It gets calls in his favor.
Well, they tend to look at him as a special teams
specialist. He's not, by the way.
I know
he's not at all.
I know. I don't really understand where that's coming from.
He is noticeably slower.
Well, it's going to happen.
Of course it's going to happen. It's just like I'm watching him skate. I'm just like, no, that's not Nieto. Nieto's quicker than that. Oh, it is Nieto. Oh, that's not good.
To your point.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to your point, Alex, like, it feels like they literally only invited those two along as sort of like a mea culpa. We're going to stick you with the CUDA the rest of the year, but we want you to know that we like you. So you're coming along. So please don't pout. Please don't be sad when you end up with the CUDA. There's no other real explanation.
I mean,
for Eklund and Bordelot being on the team and not playing.
There is a slight difference, and that slight difference, and you can weigh how much you think this benefits them or not. Is that when you're up, you are practicing with the NHL club, and you are practicing that system with those players directly. Now, I would not argue that makes up for the lack of ice time, and I would also not argue for that, mainly because, again, the Sharks have been pretty clear that they intend to run the same system between both teams. Now, obviously, we've yet to really see that since it's so early. But if that is the game plan, which it should be, then it shouldn't really matter whether you're practicing up there. Sure, maybe you're looking for chemistry, but again, if you're sitting these guys game after game, they're going to get frustrated and they're not going to be getting the experience they need. I would much rather them, even though the style of play is not as good as you pointed out, Ben, I would much rather see them learn the system and get ice time somewhere than learn the system and not get any opportunities to play, because I don't think that's going to benefit them either. Personally, go ahead, Colin.
Well, first, I just in my head for some reason I just imagine them flying commercial, even though they probably flew private. But just the entire team in first class, and then like Quinn going back into coach to check on the kids. But on this team, first, like I just don't understand why this team when they got up on Nashville in the second game, they were still doing stretch passes out of the D zone. Like they weren't trying to actually play possession. They're just trying to like stretch the ice and play a fast game against a team that was bigger and stronger than them, or bigger and faster. That's not a team that's trying to win in my mind. I kind of liked it because they were being consistent at least, but still, it's weird.
It's a counter. It's the. I mean, again, I was watching Premier League right before this, but it's the Premier League counter, or not Premier League, the soccer counter attack strategy, where basically you sit there and you defend, and then you look for the mistake and you try to capitalize on that mistake. But the thing is that if they've built themselves to be tougher to play, that was not evident in these first two games.
No, we very much got out muscled. But again, Nashville's a big team, but. Sure, counter punching is great if your defense can pass the puck out of the zone, which we only have one defender who can really do that. To me, it's another vote for why not Merkley, because at least Merkley could try to, shoot the puck up the ice.
Yeah.
And I agree. Kunin is great, or Kunin is a great third liner. I would love to have them as a third liner. But yeah.
You brought up another thing I think that's worth keeping in mind for people who are flying off the handle. The Nashville Predators are a better team, and that's the other thing too.
Not that much.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but exactly on paper and not on paper, obviously too. So, this isn't a team that I necessarily expected to go and beat. And I'm not trying to make excuses for the team. Just have to be realistic that it's been 2 games in the season. So, all you fans flying completely off the handle, you might be right. But wait just a little longer.
Well, who did we like? Because we said we liked Cunnin.
Yeah.
I actually liked what was his name? Lawrence. Yeah. I liked Lawrence. I really like them as like a fourth liner. Just seems like good tempo, good heads up. Teemo and Hurdle, like they are both looking nice.
I mean, the only 2
Couture,
good players on the team look nice.
I think Couture looked like Couture. Like he wasn't at his full throttle top gear, but I think he was doing his same sort of hardworking gameplay.
I do think it was a little hard for the forwards at points in these 2 games. And again, I sound like I'm making a million excuses for them. I'm not trying to, but that ice was garbage, and not just the ice, but the fact that the both nets kept getting knocked off the mooring so easily. There were a number of points, and this happened to both teams, to be fair, but there were definitely for the Sharks, there were a couple of situations, and you can sense their frustration in both games, where they would get a play in the zone and they would be generating decent offense, and then in the middle of that, the net would just immediately pop off, which you still got to put the puck in the net at the end of the day, and stuff like that's going to happen, and you got to deal. But it was a pretty frustrating amount between both those games compared to what you would usually see. And that you heard Randy Hahn or Dan Wisniewski, whoever you're listening to, you heard them commenting about it too. And that's obviously frustrating, because when you do get into those moments where you can generate some offense, and the Sharks did have a couple of those moments. And again, I think that's why we all feel the way we feel about Cunnin, and I agree with you about Reedy, Ben. But in general, having a guy who's sitting there who's basically just fishing for those dirt goals, and whatever rebound he can get is great. But if play keeps stopping, it's going to be pretty difficult to do. So, hopefully when they get back over to, to the States or Canada and they're on NHL ice, we see a little bit less of that. We can see how some of those situations may play out versus sort of just getting whistled quickly. But I honestly, to answer your question, Colin, I wasn't really impressed with all that much, other than, Cunnin was the only guy that I it was about what I expected, but it was refreshing to see because there have been points in the last couple of years where it just felt like the Sharks wouldn't collapse all the way in, or it's been a long time since we've had a proper Pavelski like dude sitting in front of the net, and not Hurdle will do it from time to time, but you're like, please don't get hurt, Hurdle. You know what I mean? Like that's so one guy who, when Burns was on the ice, you were just like, please don't rifle it directly at his face.
Yeah.
So to have someone a little more expendable, I guess, in that position was encouraging. But otherwise,
it's worth pointing out, by the way, Cunningham wasn't really actually in front of the net.
No.
He
was just fishing in
power
that.
play sort of structure actually has a guy playing at the net side.
Yes.
And that's where Cunningham was sitting.
Yes.
Which is fine. Like, they're not looking for tips. They're trying to get the puck into the center, or from the circles, get those shots in, which is fine.
Yeah, well, they lost their point shooter who was going to set up most of those tips. I mean, yes, you have Carlson who can do that, but otherwise you're just going to be cycling a forward back there to attempt that. And Lord knows we don't want our defensemen pushed forward at this point. I mean, they're not very, like, we throw Vlasic forward or whoever. Like, no thanks. But just having someone, I guess, there with that presence of mind, because there was a period of time where it did feel like the Sharks getting those sort of dangerous opportunities right there, like, it just felt like they were boxed out last season quite a bit. And so I thought that was encouraging, but I wasn't really encouraged by anything else that I saw on the ice personally.
So this is the first time, not like we're getting into specific players here. This is the first time we've seen LeBanc in, like, it feels like 14 months. Like it feels like forever. What did you guys think about his play?
Fine. I mean, here's the problem for me is you really need LeBanc for this roster. Again, to get this roster to do what it needs to do, LeBanc has to be at a higher level than he's been the last couple of seasons. And, even in these first two games, I thought he had a couple of nice plays or a couple of moments where he sort of drove to the net a bit, which was nice. But you need him to be a lot more than that. I mean, the Sharks basically, if you look at their roster right now, you have, Couture, who's relatively steady, but is aging. You have Hurdle, who's still doing great. You have Meyer, who's small sample size, but still looked it looked a little bit more like last season than the season before, which is great. And then you have Barabanov, who is obviously out, who the Sharks really need to play as well as he did last year and hopefully step his game up. And then you don't really have much else. And so a guy like LeBanc, to me, to have value on this team, it can't just be average. Like, and that's a hard thing, I think, for some of these guys. The same kind of goes for Bordelot and Eklund. Like, if those guys come in, for the Sharks to do anything this year, they gotta be really ready, and they gotta come in with a spark. And I'm not saying you wait for that, but if that doesn't occur, this is going to be a long, painful season for everybody. And I think that's where I put LeBanc. What about you, Ben? Did you have thoughts on LeBanc's play?
My issue with LeBanc, in the way that he played the first couple of games, is I think maybe more to do with what they're asking him to do in the system. So he put a lot of pucks on net, which not a terrible thing.
Right.
But I think that LeBanc is a better passer than shooter, and I'm sort of baffled by the fact that they're not using him on the power play as a passer.
Yeah, that was weird.
Him being in net front was weird.
So I made a comment partway through yesterday's game where it feels to me like David Quinn never watched this team over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Has no familiarity with these players and what they're good at. And when he became coach, he just like, no, I don't need to do that. I'm just gonna roll and see what happens. Because like, putting Nieto out with 3 minutes to go in the game and needing a goal is coaching malpractice. He doesn't seem to know where LeBanc fits best, and LeBanc should be one of your power play guys. He should be basically getting all of his points on the power play because he's not particularly good at 5-on-5. And he makes it was funny yesterday, somebody commented on what a great shift that was by LeBanc. He was just so active in the offensive zone, and it was a shift in which, he was fine in the offensive zone, but he also turned the puck over at the blue line and then had to clean up his own fucking mess, which is that's pure LeBanc.
Yep.
So I think LeBanc's jury's out, like what he is, because he was terrible last year, even before he got hurt, and that was a real bad thing given the money they'd invested in him.
Which was a make good contract,
Yeah,
which we
exactly.
are not fans of in this podcast.
No, and so I'm
Yeah.
I mean, I'm encouraged by him putting shots on net. That's not the worst thing in the world, but I'd like to see the team figure out that he is going to pile up his points on the power play. That's where his job is, and he could play the point in the 1-3-1 that they're doing.
Yep.
He shouldn't be at net front, and he can also play on the right wing, the right circle, which is where he typically played on the Sharks power play before this. So I hope Quinn figures this shit out pretty fast, but there's also indications he doesn't understand what score effects are, so I'm not real encouraged in any way, shape, or form as to this new coaching staff. The only thing I've liked is the emphasis on getting the puck into the dangerous areas as opposed to pumping it back to the point, and the new power play structure. The player decision making has, who's playing and why has been just the worst. Like Buffnurian.
Yeah, I was going to say roughly the same, which is annoying. I do sort of always get annoyed when fans immediately, with the Bordelot and Eklund situation, point to, again, Quinn's New York stint, because the dude coached college for quite a while. He coached U.S. juniors for quite a while. So it's not like he doesn't necessarily understand development, and it doesn't necessarily mean that because he acted one way in New York, he'll do it again. He may, hopefully not. When you listen to interviews in the preseason, he sort of talked about some of that stuff, and you'd hope that he would move on. But I do agree with you, Ben. I think that's a really good observation. I felt the same way with some of the player deployment, in that it did feel like the organization, the new folk in the organization, didn't watch or know. Now, to be fair, it is small sample size beginning of the season, so it does take time to get that stuff going. And the expectation probably shouldn't be that after a training camp and a couple preseason games, one of which is on international ice, which again, that to me, I understand the promotional aspect of that for the NHL, but I would prefer not to have games on international ice if they're not going to be playing on international ice in the regular season, because especially for a last game right before, that should be a tune-up for you. And I feel like that game not that I think the Sharks would have played much better, but I think that game presented a missed opportunity.
Nashville had to do the same thing.
No, I know. I don't.
So like,
it's not. Listen. I'm not saying it's for the Sharks in general. I don't like that.
Yeah.
For me, there's an actual. I know some people look at preseason and shrug it off and go, "Don't care." I agree. I don't care about the wins and losses, but there's a utility factor of the preseason. You are trying to narrow down your camp to figure out where to put people, where they're sending them back to the AHL, to juniors, who's making your roster. And then those last one or two games, you ought to be using to make fine-tune tweaks to your system to try to prep for those first couple of games. If you're on international ice, and again, it's not all things being equal, I don't care about that. You can't do that. It is not the same game. And you could see that when you watch the game. Honestly, I enjoyed watching the Sharks play on international ice because it was a lot more open. And, you could sort of see fast skating and you could see great shooting and fun passes and stuff like that. But then the second you get to that first NHL game, all of that goes away. And your system's not going to work. It's not going to suddenly just translate over to the international side. So to me, other than the marketing value, that game wasted an opportunity for the Sharks to tighten up and prepare. And that's where I think I was bummed out about it. And plenty of the other teams faced it too. I get it. I totally get it. But I think the NHL, obviously it's a business and they want growth, and I understand that. But I don't think that was really super beneficial for the play on the ice for the regular season or going in. Like, I think that was a wasted game essentially for the fun of exhibition. If they're going to do that, I would much prefer they do that earlier than right before. But even earlier, then you've got more people that you're trying to get looks at and whittle down. So I think it's a tricky thing for them. That's my rant. I typically like international ice, but it just feels like a weird
Yeah.
curveball.
And I mean, it's not like they even really gave the youth the most amount of time to shake stuff out. They still kind of shifted the people they knew they were going to play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at that point, because they had to travel, that's what you were going to do. I think my annoyance is more the fact that especially for the style of play the Sharks claim they want to play, that does not work on international ice, and was never going to. So I don't really think they were able to play that game in tune properly. And again, first couple of games, right? So you should expect an adjustment period here. They're not going to. This is not a team that is really. It's certainly not a cup ready team. You can argue all day whether or not you think they're going to sneak into a last spot. You can argue all day whether or not you think that's going to be valuable. But with the changes to coaches and rosters, stuff like those games, it's kind of important, especially when you're talking about getting to know your players and getting to know a new team. But whatever, it's also fun. So I get it. And the players enjoyed it, and making the players happy sometimes is nice as well. Let's just talk about the scores here real quick. So of those actual NHL games against Predators, the Sharks lost the first game 4-1. Only goal coming from Teemo and Hurdle. I felt like the Sharks played a pretty decent first period for this game, especially given first period of the first game of the season. But then sort of it wasn't as polished moving on, especially in that second period. And so the Sharks would end up losing that 4-1. Did you guys have any thoughts about the game itself or the breakdown of the game for this first one?
I mean, we broke down in the second period.
Yeah. That's a good observation.
I mean, I think the only things I would say would actually apply to both games, honestly, which is you can see positive signs in what the Sharks are trying to do with their forward core in terms of emphases, if not abilities. The team knew going into this year that they were going to have trouble scoring goals, and didn't really do anything that realistically helps that with their free agency pickups, right?
Right.
They acknowledged it was the problem. They claimed that they were trying to address them, right, with who they picked up, and then they picked up, Kananou's fine, Lawrence, who can't score but looks good with the puck, and then Svechnikov, who knows, and one of the things I think actually that was most maybe concerning to me was how invisible Nico Sturm was, like, throughout both games to me.
Yeah.
And because he is a guy who could be providing secondary scoring if you could get him useful, line mates. And then, on the defensive side, it's just like you could not make worse decisions to structure your defensive core for a breakout centered offense than they have done. Like it's almost like they intentionally are trying to put together an expansion level defense because you have problems in the first game with really terrible mistakes on the defensive side made by Benning and Harrington, and so sure you send out Harrington, who's a never was, but you bring in Magna, who is absolute garbage. I mean, you didn't have any other options because you didn't bring good players with you on the defensive side, but I just like going into this season with those 6 guys, you've got one bona fide NHL player. You've got 2 guys who are coming off of injuries. That's Shemek and Ferraro, and jury's out on both of those guys. I am not convinced.
And Ferraro getting hurt in that second game was panic-inducing for me because I'm like, I'm not even the biggest necessarily, like I'm not the heaviest of believers of Ferraro yet, but I was like, we can't afford to lose.
I'll say it. I don't think Ferraro's good. I think Ferraro was just as okay. I think Ferraro was just as responsible for how bad the Ferraro Burns pairing as Burns was. I'll be perfectly honest. Ferraro is never where he should be on defense. I don't know if that's injury related or playing with Burns broke his brain. But I don't think Ferraro's good, and I don't think Shemek is ever going to be NHL level again after his knee injury. He wasn't fast in the first place. and but they're intentionally focusing on playing these guys. I mean, Vlasic, it's a bad thing when your 4,000-year-old defenseman who might be washed looked like your second best defenseman all weekend.
Yeah.
Because and then Benning and Harrington and Megna, no good NHL organization would have those guys on their AHL teams.
Yeah.
And then here they are on the NHL team.
No, I agree. It's harsh, but I totally agree. Listen, real quick, the Sharks' second game, they ended up losing that one 3-2. Luke Kunin opened the scoring on a nice play in the first period. Logan Couture would score in the second period. The Sharks did. I thought the end of this game. Obviously it's late, but I thought the Sharks made a pretty good push towards the very end of this game.
Too little, too late.
It's called score effects, my friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Nashville turtled. That's why this, and this is what worries me.
No, I get
that's
it.
what Quinn said too. Is like, I thought we did really good in the third period. It's like, oh fuck.
I'm not saying that I thought they did good the entire third period, and I agree with you, Colin. I think it was obviously too little, too late. I mean, I think that's obvious, right? And that's old Sharks, which is really effing annoying. But what I do appreciate, what I did, if I had to find a positive here. I did feel like the Sharks were continuously trying to press, whether they were successful or not, all the way through. And again, I'm saying that because a year or two, not last year, the year before, I'm still stung by that, where the Sharks didn't wake up for the game, and then they would play maybe a period, and then that was kind of it. And then last year, they sort of had a lot more drive. Now, they struggled to put it in the net, and that was a bit of an issue. And they weren't better than a lot of the teams that they played, and that was also an issue. But we talked about how at least it felt like they were really pressing or trying to press for 3 periods. And I still got the sense here there's a skill level gap, obviously, which isn't great, but score effects are not. I thought some of the opportunities that they had in the end, even with Nashville turtling, I thought looked good, and they didn't get it in. At the end of the day, that's all that counts. And that's the frustrating thing is, again, I don't know where their scoring is going to come from, because it can't all come from Hurdle. You know what I mean? And when Barabanov comes back, that's another, and Meyer as well. Because if all your scoring is going to wind up coming from 2 players, and I know it's weird to say because technically only 1 goal came from those guys, and I get it. Like, I don't think Kunin's scoring is going to be a high scoring regular affair. Couture, who knows? He can score for sure, but he's gotten a little bit streakier, I would say, in his older
age. That was
a
swing and a prayer goal too, right there.
Yeah, for sure. So that's what they gotta again sort out. And if you hope that Barabanov comes in and that solves it, that's still not enough players, and he's gonna wind up on one of those top lines anyway. So they gotta figure out a way. And I know what you're going to say, Ben, play the kids. I don't disagree. But they got to figure out a way to get scoring from more than like 2 or 3 people and from more than one, maybe 2 lines.
Well, all of those people that we would want to be carrying or leading the scoring on this team were on the ice for that, 2.5 minutes of a goalie pulled session.
Yeah.
And, they didn't get it done. The best we can possibly field. And it was it was Carlson, Hurdle, Meyer, Couture, LeBanc, and Kunin. And they didn't get it done. And I just love it because I'm looking at the shift charts. And in response to seeing all our heavy hitters go out, Nashville's like, Yossi, take it easy. Just go sit out for the rest of the game. And it's like, okay, cool. That's how dangerous we are. Oh, it hurts.
I mean, look, they're not a good team. Like, I know, and again, it's small sample size, but there's nothing here that indicates all that I think we've seen occur so far is that the Sharks try to shift what the issues are, but the offseason pickups didn't really address much of anything.
Wait, I just thought of something. So let's say Reimer comes out and is just almost lights out again, he's just stands on his head, amazing. I would laugh for years if we had a Patrick Waugh moment where the team just gives up 8 or 10 goals and Reimer doesn't get pulled and Reimer just storms out of the tank, just being like, last game in San Jose.
I mean, here's a hard thing. Reimer can play the best game in Konkinen and can play as much as they want. But if the defense is going to play like this, and the Sharks don't have the offense to make up for it, and
That's
again,
what I'm saying.
you've lost a lot of goals. I am 100% for that Burns trade. I'm not for what the Sharks did with contracts after that trade, but for the Burns trade. But you have to acknowledge that when you're doing that, you're giving up, goals, and they got to figure out a way to do it. And I'm right there with you, Ben. I know you're not even saying it because you're being restrained here, but I would have at the start of this season, my third and fourth lines would have been a lot of those kids. And again, give a couple more games to see how consistent all this junk is, but it's going to be a long season if this is what we're looking at, through and through. So hopefully the coaching staff, if they do a couple more games, makes a decision quickly to go, this isn't working. It doesn't stick around and do that. I don't think they will, but that's what you gotta kind of hope for.
Wait, 4 in the net tacos you get is always if the Sharks are scoring, right? Like if we just get blown out, it's not going to be like tacos every game.
I don't think the Sharks can score. So for me,
saying it needs to be team agnostic. Just 4 in the net tacos you get. Everyone gets tacos. So you go to Sharks.
It's a consolation prize.
I mean, listen, I'll tell you something. With the price of concessions right now at Sharks games, you should get 4 tacos just for buying a ticket. I get calls at least 3 times a day, starting at 7:00 in the morning, from their ticket sales people, relations people, and they release this breakaway package, which is confusing and weird. But Colin, I know you don't have the ability to go to as many games as you would like, obviously being where you're located, but even going to TCU Arena for the rookie tournament, which I enjoyed, and it's a nice arena and all that stuff. And concessions there were cheaper than they are at the Tank, and it was still like $14 for a Coors Light, and like $13 for a $12 or $13 for a pretzel. Yeah, well, and that's the thing is that you're trying to lure people back in, but the quality of ice there isn't good, and you're not, maybe you've made more opportunities to get tickets at a better-ish price, but then you get there and you're getting completely screwed. So, hey, listen.
Damped by inflation.
Okay, so they got to make up their money somewhere, right? Okay, 3 stars of this week. Ooh. Now remember, we had 1 game on international ice, and then we had 2 actual games back to back.
Count.
I'm just throwing out. It's the week. It covers the week. That's my point. Who wants to go first? I know, Colin, since you spoke up. How about you go first?
Ooh, okay. I'm gonna give Lawrence my 3rd star because I was actually kind of shocked to see someone who I was like, "Whoa, that guy's good. Who is that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's Lawrence. Okay, I'm gonna pay attention to him." Yeah, it's gonna Lawrence, and then Hurdle and Meyer can just Hurdle gets 1st star because he got to play in front of his home. So, and Šimek too. Šimek gets honorable mention. I am actually okay skating him to play at his home country. That's really cool. But he's not a star. So yeah, Lawrence is 3rd. I guess Meyer is 2nd, and Hurdle gets 1st.
All right, I'm gonna go next, Ben. I'm gonna give it to Lawrence begrudgingly, I guess I would say, because the 3rd star for me is not really
honorable
existent
mention.
It's not really existent this week. My 2nd star I'm going to give to I'm actually a little bit. I think these are closer than they probably should be. My 2nd star is going to go to Luke Kunin. He did play well, I thought, in that preseason in Berlin, and he got a goal there. He obviously got a goal here in the 2nd game, and he had an assist in the 1st game as well. So he's just having that front of net presence. He's showing up, which I think is really good. And then my 1st star is going to be Hurdle, because obviously, him playing in Czech was really important to him. He scored a goal that kind of got the Sharks fired up for a couple of minutes there. And then, he still looked great. And I think it's really important. And that's not a knock on Meyer at all. I thought Meyer looked, good too, but obviously Hurdle getting the goal, got to give it to him. What about you, Ben?
I will give Vlasic the third star for looking
Wow.
somewhat
Editor,
less than
better.
completely washed. In the first two games. I mean, again, second best defenseman on the ice, and all that implies.
True.
Yeah.
Um,
Sounds like you really feel like a third star is deserved. This is what I'm getting. Go ahead, second star.
Second star, I'm going to give to Cunnin
Yeah.
because again, I have nothing against Cunnin. In fact, I like what he brings to this team. Just you could have gotten it a lot cheaper with higher upside.
Yeah. Can I tell you the one thing I don't like about him?
Sure.
His number.
Oh, right. He has 11.
It
Ooh,
really
that needs to go.
screws
That
with
needs to
me.
go.
Why do you hate him
Yeah.
having Marcel Gottsch's number?
Oh, you
Oh.
stop it.
Oh.
You stop it. Do not listen. The only guy we've ever had in an all-star game calls his shot and scores. The only guy we've ever had on our team
Oh, I didn't know
who
Marcel
scores
Gottsch
from
did
half
that.
ice in
Weird.
the playoffs. The half ice playoffs against the Blues, and we hated the Blues. I mean, come on now. That, I know the Sharks don't like to retire numbers. Obviously, Marlowe will be the first they do, but oh boy, 11 to me. Gosh as well.
Yes.
And
Thank you for reminding me of that. I was seething over that the whole game.
I mean, it's not his fault. I just first star, Ben.
Can I get past your Nolan rage?
No.
First star is Tomas Hurdle, just because he's the best player on the Sharks, bar none.
Yeah.
And I think Meyer. I think I agree. Meyer had a fine couple of games. He didn't get on the score sheet, but I think the difference between the two of them is occasionally Meyer, will make a foolish play, like, and I don't think I've ever seen Tomas Hurdle make a foolish play, so he gets the nod here. So.
Yeah, if Meyer starts keeping his head up to actually look for other people, he's going to be scary.
I both those guys are good, and I think obviously Hurdle. I mean, I don't love it for Hurdle, but for the Sharks organization, like locking Hurdle up was smart, even if you don't like that contract length, because quite frankly, they don't got anything else anywhere near it except for Meyer. But Hurdle is a player who I feel like continuously, he's still to me improving, which is great, and his consistency is great, and he's fun to watch. I don't know why they still interview him, because his interviews are just fast talking rants. I guess maybe I should relate, but yeah, Meyer, it's going to be real interesting to see what happens there, because obviously, as you pointed out last podcast, Ben, the Sharks they're in a bit of a wait and see to figure out how consistent he's going to be compared to last season. Obviously, given the sample size of the last couple of seasons before they flunked out a lot, they also need to figure out a way to make room to do that. And then, the unfortunate thing I think for the Sharks is, should he be who the Teemo Meyer that we like, then this season's also an audition going the other way. And so
yeah,
he's going to be expensive.
Yeah, he's going to be expensive. That's why you should probably start prepping our good friends Bordelot and Eklund now, as you would say, Nick Merkley or Ryan Merkley. Ha. Ron
Merkley.
Can't have too many Merkleys.
Well, you can't have any Merkleys, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. The Sharks have a long break this week until next Friday and Saturday. They have a back-to-back at home. That is Friday the 14th against Carolina Hurricanes at 7:30 p.m. if you're in West Coast time. Colin, I'm not doing Swedish time. Sorry, bud. And then on Sunday, they take on the Chicago Blackhawks. Not a particularly great team there. It will be interesting to see Burns back in the tank. I don't really care as much as I think some other people will. I can guarantee you the focal point of the conversation for that game will be all about that specifically, because there probably won't be a lot more to talk about. But those are the two games that we have coming up for what we consider this podcast week. Sharks right now, as you can imagine, are sitting in last place in the entire NHL, having been one of two teams to play games and having lost both of them. So they are currently 0-2 with 0 points and a -4 differential there, which is not fun for us. But it's going to be a long season. Beginning of a season, it was always going to be a little rocky. Listen, you can check out this podcast by subscribing to it on Apple's podcasting app. You can also, Android people, figure it out or go to Spotify You can check us out on circlingthecup.com, where we post these podcasts if you need to sneak it at work. You can check us out on Twitter, Ben, at Circling the Cup, which I've noticed, Ben, has now become a very even mix of football and Premier League stuff, and the occasional board game post, and then the occasional history lesson, which is great. You can come
occasionally.
you can come and you can learn, and it's nice. But we can't all take credit for it. That's Ben. And of course, facebook.com/Circling the Cup. We only really use that to post the live streams that we do. And by the way, we do try to do these Sundays at around 11 o'clock most weeks. So if you're bored and you're sitting around, you're having some brunch, some fancy avocado toasts, coffee, you can listen live and write in. We are always happy to take questions and chat about it. I think this is going to be a season where we could really use your help, much like last season, where I don't know about you guys, I get the sense we're going to be talking about the same things over and over and over again unless you ask questions. So for the love of God, ask questions. But guys, that concludes this week's podcast. Say bye-bye.
Dishonor for Connor.
Really?
McDavid going through this defense is going to be fun to watch.
For who?
Bye.
Hockey fans?
Wait till Kane does it. You're going to love that.
Bomb for Bedard.
Out. Leave. Go.
Benito. That was fun. Yeah, it's going to suck. This is going to be a sucky season. I agree.
It's I will say, and this is just whole throwaway thought I had while watching the game. I kind of like seeing Greer up in the GM box more than Wilson, because Wilson always looked like you just caught him between the tanning salon and the golf course, like you just happened to stop at a hockey game.
Yeah, I think the bummer is, even though I thought that Wilson was running out of ideas, I did prefer.
I thought